Just before we break, we're going to have some words from Karen Collier, who we introduced before. And just as Karen's coming down, Tsering and Tenpa, can I say two things, and I'll say more toward the end of the meeting. We salute your bravery, and we pray that you be surrounded by love and strength and goodness today and all the days of your life.
Thanks, Howard. Just without breaking the momentum of Tenpa's insights and picking up on his notion of hope that he expressed at the end there, that's something I'd really like to talk about as my contribution about the notion of hope and fear. I met Tenpa in 2007, and we were talking about Tibet one afternoon after he'd been to Tibet in 2008, as he'd stated, on a fraught reunion with family to Tibet. And he asked me very vividly, candidly, he said, "Do you think there is hope for Tibetans?" And I stood there and I didn't know a lot about Tibet. I'm not a Tibet expert. And I didn't know what to say. I said, well, let me go and research, let me go and do some research and investigation, and I can't answer that now, but I hope I can answer that with some rationale. So 7 years later, that sort of thought kept me going to think of ways how I can support Tibet as an individual at the grassroots. And together with Tenpa, as Howard mentioned earlier, we've really attempted to use creativity and this notion of moral imagination to think of ideas and campaigns and grassroots projects that are collaborative and not necessarily attached to any institutions. And in the end, we've come up with this book, which Tenpa conceived and compiled. It's called Dear Dalai Lama. And this came about through this notion of hope and what we can do as individuals, that despite the political obstacles and the lack of political will by our leaders and the circumstances that Tibetans find themselves in, there are small projects that can help the Tibetans on an everyday level and help to keep them uplifted really with this sort of obstacles that they're facing. So about 2 years ago, Tenpa conceived of this book, Dear Dalai Lama, Letters from Australians, and it was his objective to publish this book to coincide with the Dalai Lama's visit to Australia this year, and that also coincided with his 80th birthday anniversary. So Tenpa came to me and he said, what do you think about this idea? You know, we could compile letters from Australians from really diverse backgrounds and present this to His Holiness on his 80th birthday and really show the impact that His Holiness the Dalai Lamas have on everyday Australians, and to really project that sense of hope, mutually reinforcing sort of sense of hope back to His Holiness for everything that he gives to the international community. So to cut a long story short, this book had a very fraught life before it came into existence, and I'm here today to tell you a little bit about it and how this project supports the Tibetans in their freedom struggle. And on the notion of fear that Tenpa mentioned earlier, I've just finished writing an article for the Centre for Peace and Conflict Studies in our biannual newsletter called Peace Rights. And it talks about this notion of fear that Tenpa mentioned, that this year specifically, in the Dalai Lama's 80th birthday, Tibetans have abandoned this notion of fear to celebrate the Dalai Lama's birthday. It's a cause for celebration. So to end this conversation on a light note and one of hope, this book came about as something to celebrate the Dalai Lama's 80th birthday and his contributions to the global community. So Tenpa approached the Centre for Peace and Conflict Studies, and the Professor Stuart Rees, who is the founder of the Centre for Peace, supported this project unwaveringly, and it really fits in with the values and the mission of the Centre for Peace and Conflict Studies. We have a very robust advocacy and outreach sort of a dimension of the centre besides having an academic program. So Stuart supported Tenpa with this project. There's about 45 letters from Australians, some of them you may have heard of, all Australian visionaries, I would say, in their own right. We've got the former Foreign Minister of Australia, the Honourable Gareth Evans, Professor Stuart Rees. We've got Dr. Howard Bell, who also contributed a letter. The former leader of the Greens, Dr. Bob Brown. We've also have environmental researchers and human rights advocates, activists and academics, business leaders and lawyers, and it's really a testament to the impact that His Holiness has. It's not just about Tibet, it speaks to numerous global conflicts, this anthology of letters. So I'd like to encourage people to have a look at the book and buy this book, which we have today. It's $10, and that $10 would go towards the Centre for Peace and Conflict Studies Scholarships Program. What I'd like to do, if you could bear with me, is just read one letter from the book and then invite Howard up to recite his letter that he's contributed to the book. So this is a letter that Professor Stuart Rees, who is the founder of the Centre for Peace and Conflict Studies, he wrote on the 26th of May in 2014, "Dear Dalai Lama, your constant support of universal human rights and your significant advocacy of the principles and practice of non-violence provide inspiration for all citizens of Australia and beyond. Such support and advocacy has a particular relevance for the people of Tibet. Your leadership, by example, also speaks to numerous other conflicts and the massive human rights abuses that accompany them. In all dictatorships, and especially in Sri Lanka, West Papua, Syria, Egypt, and in the failure to recognise the human rights of all Palestinians. Striving for the equal opportunities for all people, and in particular for women and their daughters, is a political, spiritual and intellectual priority for the 21st century. This priority represents a goal which can only be achieved through the attainment of human rights, irrespective of gender, religious affiliation or ethnic origin. It is always reassuring to know that you also strive to achieve such a goal. By tracing the same footsteps as Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King and Nelson Mandela, you have shown the journey to be followed by all peoples if they are to experience freedom to realise their human potential, and to do so by promoting the freedom of others. There is ample evidence that such leadership for freedom promotes mental and physical health, and there is ample evidence that such promotion of universal human rights can be coupled to respect for democracy and for the notion of a common humanity. May you continue to be a vigorous and universally valued leader for those precious values and principles of non-violence, interdependence and human rights, without which we are all lost. Thank you also for your courage. Happy 80th birthday, solidarity and best wishes, Stuart Rees." So this year, Tibetans in Australia abandoned fear and supporting Tibetans inside Tibet celebrated, and this book is a cause for celebration, I would say, and I hope that you'll maybe give a gift to somebody or send a copy to a thought leader or a library, which Dr. Bob Brown said that this is something that we can do at the individual level. And he described this small offering and gift to the Dalai Lama as a bouquet of flowers. So I might ask Howard if he will narrate his letter to the Dalai Lama.
Can I say, just before we break, and just before I read my contribution, thank you, Karen, what a wonderful honour it was to be asked to contribute to this beautiful book, because it was an opportunity to share the outrage, the solidarity and the commitment that every activist everywhere in the world shares when they hear of the journeys that our guests this evening have undergone. And this is a very short and small way of sharing that journey and being part of that journey and reassuring you of our solidarity. This was written approaching the spring equinox of 2014. 2014 seems like about 6 weeks ago. In fact, 2015 will also seem that way very shortly. Dear Dalai Lama, as Your Holiness's 80th birthday approaches, it's a wonderful opportunity to thank you for the love that you've brought into this world through your teachings, reflections and writings. I have been deeply inspired by all your books. You show people of all faiths the glories, joys of now. I especially love your book of love and compassion. In particular, it has helped me to see and to show others how every single moment is overflowing with abundant miracles and goodness. Loving kindness fills every word you speak, every action you take, every idea you share. The things you have celebrated and the joy you have shown us will always leave this world and its people with more compassion than otherwise might have been the case. I especially enjoyed For Tibet with Love, the first Tibetan Arts and Film Festival in Australia at Sydney Opera House in the summer of 2011. The music, the conversation, the poetry and the prose captivated all and filled our hearts with much joy. Your talks in many places about happiness have helped so many of us to learn how to be happy by choice rather than live the conditional happiness programmed into our communities by advertising and the false hopes that material possessions and things can lead to a state of happiness. I wish Your Holiness every blessing and goodness in 2015, the year of Your Holiness's 80th birthday. May the kindness and compassion you foster and promulgate be returned to you in abundance. And may your positive personal example continue to inspire, nurture and uplift all those who have the good fortune to know you or to know of you. In love, solidarity and kindness, now and always, Howard Bell.
I'd just like to, thanks Howard, that was lovely, and the letters are so diverse. There are people that you might never see in the same room together, from all political spectrums and across cultures and borders, so I hope you'll enjoy this book. I just wanted to add that anybody who's interested in learning a little bit more about human rights in Tibet, since this is the topic, you know, the declining human rights of China, this topic goes beyond Tibet, and in this case we're talking about Tibet. But there are 2 articles that I'd like you to have a look at if you're interested in learning the most current information. And one of them is the current white paper on Tibet that is published by the Chinese government. And another one is an article which was published by Reuters in October called The Long Arm of China. And it goes into detail about some of the tactics that the Chinese government are using that Tenpa described, this sort of intrusive surveillance. And I really encourage you to read those. The latest white paper on Tibet, it claims to be ushering in a golden era for Tibetans. And it states that it has this objective to control the reincarnation of the Dalai Lama in the future, the institution of the Dalai Lama, and this is very disturbing for Tibetans and Tibet supporters. And you can read a lot about that in this white paper. It focuses also on the historiographical revisionism, but most concerning, says the Tibetan Prime Minister in exile, Dr. Lobsang Sangay, is that it outlines China's master plan, it says, by ruling and controlling the process of reincarnation. In a response to this white paper, the Central Tibetan Administration brought out their own paper, and I thought it was really noteworthy to highlight this tonight. And it's at the crux of China's human rights record and its decline in relation to Tibet. And it reads, "The international community will judge how the Communist Party treats Tibetans today as an accurate indicator of its behaviour to the rest of the world. And more crucial would be to observe how a rising China behaves towards those it feels are weaker or in its way." So yeah, have a look at that white paper, and I'll give this back to Tenpa now to finish up.
Thank you so much. Before I formally thank our guests later in the evening, we're going to have a little break. So we'll have a break for 5 minutes. During that time, the amazing and incredible Joe Nagy will pass around the tin. Please contribute what you can to support politics in the pub, and please also take an opportunity to have a closer look at the Dear Dalai Lama book, which is on the table at the back of the room, and feel free to make purchases and to support the wonderful work of Tibet.